Alright, this cut on the side of my mouth did not heal in time to film, and I think it's gonna really show up. So that's embarrassing, but let's pretend it's a Joker reference. Come on, it's perfect. Christopher Nolan is almost certainly my favorite filmmaker, and yet this is the only time I will discuss his work on the channel. He is simply not a franchise kind of guy, which is weird because his first, and I am assuming last, multi-film series is the entire reason he's now a household name. Even after 15 years of non-stop superhero media, Nolan's Batman trilogy maintains a firm hold on the popular consciousness, and the narrative around this franchise is equally legendary. The Dark Knight specifically is often credited as one of the biggest reasons that the superhero genre enjoys the utter dominance it does today. A film so tonally balanced and just overwhelmingly good that it drew in even non-comic book fans by the millions and opened the floodgates of mainstream acceptance across the board. So with Batman poised to become incredibly relevant again thanks to the Matt Reeves film, now's the perfect time to look back at the character's last solo outing. This video is going to be a little different though because I really want to focus on that relationship between the grounded and the outlandish and how the trilogy tried to strike a balance, because that tumultuous relationship is a saga in of itself. We will also be... What in the world can that be? I am the Knight.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
Bruce?
Batman Begins, while being the first film of this continuity, is not the first film of the overall Batman franchise, so the first thing I want to do is look at how these filmmakers differentiated their take on the character. Easy stuff first, they picked villains that hadn't been used yet. Ra's al Ghul and his League of Shadows make their cinematic debut here, and what's more, they play a very foundational role in establishing Bale's Caped Crusader. While like in every iteration, the film feels obligated to remind us what happened to Batman's parents, this is the first film to show us Bruce's training, his physical becoming of Batman. This pays off across all three films actually, as Nolan loves to play up the unique skills he learns here, the theatricality of the character, aka smoke bomb. This is actually the main tool in this Batman's arsenal, eclipsing the traditional detective label virtually to the point of erasing it. Like all good antagonists, Ra's and the League help define the protagonist simply by being in opposition to him. During Bruce's training, we see the League's cold and savage outlook on criminals, allowing Bruce's turn on them to signal heroism. It's worth pointing out that all of this, including the childhood flashbacks, are all compressed into the first 40 minutes, leading to a pretty rushed first act. The saving grace of this flaw is that, yeah, we collectively do know Batman's backstory and general defining traits, so this is an okay way to not bore people and leave more time for the rest of the story. Just like the League of Shadows... Well, that was a freebie. Let's jump ahead to the film's third act. Unlike the first film of the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, you can check out my video on that if you'd like, it's fine. Bruce's origin story is not disconnected from the rest of the film's plot, as Ra's reemerges late in the game as the film's ultimate villain. While Bruce having crossed Ra's early on means that his arc was basically done and Batman had begun like a third of the way through the movie, this admittedly repetitive final showdown does work metaphorically. It's who he was versus who he is. Batman the hero versus the vengeful Bruce Wayne, a man so blinded by rage that he almost gunned down his parents' killer in cold blood. It's good hero origin stuff. The film's other villain, Scarecrow, is not treated as kindly by the third act. Now, Scarecrow had also not been brought to the silver screen, at least not since the very ill-advised 1939 attempt, which is surprising to me, as the character's unique ability to tap into Bruce's fears and serve as a dark reflection of his own use of terror makes him the perfect antagonist, especially when the theme of the movie is fear. I guess the inherent scary nature of the character meant he didn't gel with the tones of the previous films. Cillian Murphy's off-putting performance does certainly sell Dr. Crane as a potentially too believable kind of maniac. Where the character gets the short straw is his defeat at the hands of Rachel Dawes. Now, call me renowned Blade Runner Rick Decker, because I like Rachel, and Ryan Gosling is not my son. Rachel is more than just the love interest. She spends the movie too busy fighting judicial crookedness to deal with the publicly vapid Bruce Wayne despite being friends since childhood, and while she does have to be rescued by Batman at one point, it's from the exact same thing that he had to be rescued from not 10 minutes prior. So do I really not have a problem with how a Nolan film portrays a female character? That doesn't sound right. Now, Rachel being the one to defeat Crane would have been satisfying. Their multiple civilian standoffs definitely marked him as her antagonist, not Bruce's, who only fights him incredibly briefly twice. But the problem with having a civilian go up against a supervillain is that unless the civilian's supposed to lose, you're gonna have to wrap that up all too quickly. That is, if you want it to be realistic. And there's the magic word, realistic. That's the new angle Nolan is bringing to the Bat table. This is, after all, a dark and gritty reboot, trademarked. So let's look at the second act to see how that affects our new Batman. Much of the second act consists of Bruce gathering gadgets and allies, the Batman essentials, and this stretch is one of the film's strengths. Where the vast majority of reboots and origin stories get bogged down relaying their requisite groundwork, Batman Begins has the benefit of its shift towards realism. Nothing that is being reintroduced to us is being reintroduced exactly the same. Everything has a new, interesting aspect built into it as a result of the film's tonal novelty. Here's where the naysayers of the trilogy begin to say that Nolan is embarrassed to be making superhero movies, that the Nolaning of the Batman mythos and character is bad, let comic book movies be fun. I see where this comes from, but I don't agree, and a lot of that is because I find the process of Nolaning in of itself fun. Thanks to Morgan Freeman's Fox and his military experimental tech division, they let Batman keep pretty much all of his toys while also making them relatively plausible. The film doesn't shun its comic book roots, the creatives behind it just understood the potential in modernizing them, and I really enjoy seeing the ways in which they overcame this challenge.
Does it come in black?
That aside, if you'll allow me to be frank, this is a fundamentally dumb conversation to be having. I feel dumb right now having it because I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Batman Begins is about a billionaire who trains with ninjas and then dresses up like a bat to fight an evil psychologist who sprays people with nightmare juice and wears a potato sack on his head. The movie is not actually that grounded. For all the hoopla over Nolan's approach, it's ultimately superficial. I can't imagine anyone familiar with Batman finding Bale's version anything but, well, familiar, and the stakes of his plot are about the same as a mid-level MCU film. The actual core of the film, the story, and the characters remain entirely and unabashedly rooted in comics. This is a superhero movie through and through, a really good one too. It's remarkable that this was Nolan's first blockbuster. Quick point of clarification, when I call an element of these films very movie or very blockbuster, I am putting them on the comic side of the comics versus realism topic. I'm using the terms interchangeably here because in the context of this conversation, they basically are. It's kind of genius how they crafted this narrative of real-world Batman with little more than press tour comments and aesthetics. Forget the prestige, this is Nolan's greatest trick. Or at least it would be if it wasn't for what came next, because now Nolan's got both camps in his pockets. He gave comics fans a good movie and took their beloved character seriously, and he tricked mature filmgoers into seeing a film they may have otherwise skipped. So with all of them on board, Nolan can finally do what he wanted to do from the very beginning. Real-world Batman. But for real this time. Really.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Back in 2008, people would not shut up about The Dark Knight, and they were right not to. It remains a truly singular achievement, equal parts wildly entertaining action movie and dense crime epic, each half only enhancing, never compromising the other. It is dizzying how good it is. It honestly blows me away, and I do not blow easily. I have to admit that I played up the dark and gritty label on Batman Begins a little bit. It certainly was compared to the Schumacher films, and that was the selling point, but nobody was calling it an attempt at absolute realism. That is exactly where we are with The Dark Knight, though. There's surface level stuff like the sleeker redesign of Bale's suit and symbolic things like the Batcave being dropped in favor of just a cool garage. Going a level deeper, the look of the film is much more natural, and boy am I glad I don't have a show about cinematography or I'd have to expand on that. This aesthetic and the general somber tone of the film are typically pointed to as the film's realism, but the far more interesting and fundamental shift from Batman Begins to The Dark Knight is the storytelling itself. I just pointed out that Batman Begins is very much a superhero movie, and as such it employs the type of storytelling you'd expect from a blockbuster. It's straightforward, traditionally structured and focused, meant to be easily understood by general audiences, and for the record, those are not negative traits. The Dark Knight is built different. Now, while the term gets the general idea across and applies to the grounded events of the film, I am philosophically opposed to describing its alternate approach to storytelling as, quote, real, because no piece of fiction, least of all a Batman movie, is truly realistic. Our world simply does not operate under the sense of justice inherent to narrative. This fact always has been and forever shall be my greatest source of anguish, single-handedly fueling my need to seek sanctuary in storytelling, and therefore both my casual interests and lifelong pursuits. What I'm trying to say is, we live in a society. Yes, the Joker will be central to my analysis of The Dark Knight. Big shock. Also not a big shock, I concur with all the praise. It's so rare to get a force of nature villain who not only has a personality, but is all personality.
You think you could steal from us and just walk away?
Yeah.
I'm also a big fan of villains who take the wrong lessons from something they're right about. The Joker has a genuine point about how lots of people tend to accept horrible things if they expect them as part of the status quo, and often drop their principles when convenient. Of course, the nihilistic conclusion he takes from this, that morality is therefore a farce and a facade, is wrong, a fact that is demonstrated beautifully in the film's climax, where the people on the ferries he's rigged to blow refuse to destroy those on the other in order to save themselves. On top of this, Heath Ledger did give us one of the most memorable performances in a comic book movie, in any movie ever. He is absolutely mesmerizing every second he's on screen, and boy am I glad I don't have a show about acting, or I'd have to expand on that. The Joker is where the Dark Knight's quote on biggest quote I can find realism comes from, because he also gives me the storytelling label I'd much rather use, chaotic. That evokes the more, but not outright real approach, and overall whirlwind feeling of the movie. Here's a mid-monologue Joker quote to springboard us into the topic.
Oh, and you know the thing about chaos? It's fear.
This quote is alarmingly useful for what I'm doing here because the theme of The Dark Knight, chaos, is in fact inextricable from the theme of Batman Begins, fear. This keeps the psychological drama of the film in line with Bruce's character and his origin story. The Joker's plan to terrorize Gotham to the point of anarchy is precisely what Ra's al Ghul and Scarecrow intended, but the physical stakes feel fresh because the Joker isn't using a Tibetan poison flower being evaporated by lasers.
Look what I did to this city with a few drums of gas and a couple of bullets.
The Dark Knight's plot has been fully grounded. Scarecrow may return, but only for one scene, and as a basic drug dealer, his toxin having been reduced to little more than the source of a bad trip. The opening is a simple bank heist. The central conflict revolves entirely around run-of-the-mill money laundering, and Batman is forced to do a whole Hong Kong detour because of extradition laws. This isn't superhero stuff. This could all happen in a conventional crime movie. Batman Begins dealt with crime, but only insofar as the pawns of the superhero v supervillain plot were criminals. It didn't have much in way of crime genre conventions, but The Dark Knight does, including a less neat, relatively decentralized plot. Bruce has notably less screen time than a typical protagonist, with much of the film following and happening because of other major characters, often minor characters, and in a few instances, like the climax itself, characters we've never even seen before, creating this enticingly messy web of a plot. Combine this with Nolan's knack for superb cross-cutting and a very loose three-act structure, another thing you see in novel-esque crime films, and you get a lot of the film's chaotic energy. The way in which the Joker is responsible for this approach is much like an irredeemable megacorporation that has done untold harm to civilization while offering only vacuous social media products in return. Meta. I'll let him explain.
I try to show the schemers how pathetic their attempts to control things really are.
Now, The Dark Knight is not about storytelling or filmmaking like Inception kinda is if you squint, but it's easy to apply this label of schemers to the writers trying to control the world of their film. I gave that big speech about the order of narrative opposing the chaos of reality for a reason. It sounds deep, and the veneer of humor allows me to share very sincere things about myself. I'm doing it again right now. Also, it's where the magic of The Dark Knight comes from. The Joker does not have a backstory, his goals are constantly shifting, his motives are, hopefully, completely unrelatable. He is by design antithetical to the discipline of drama, and that's why he's a perfect villain. He's not frightening just because of how he acts, but because he is existentially removed from the axiom of story, making him spiritually unstoppable.
You have nothing to threaten me with. Nothing to do with all your strength.
The biggest and best decision the Nolans and Goyer made while writing was to not fight this, but embrace it and push the film away from the rules and trappings of the typical blockbuster, the moviest kind of movie. By not watering their villain down to keep things simple, by letting the Joker run wild as one of the most active antagonists I've ever come across, The Dark Knight is elevated from a certainly still good superhero movie like Batman Begins to an absolute maelstrom of twists and turns that keep our heroes reeling and the audience riveted. Enough that it remains one of the few films that people agree should be considered for the title of Best Superhero Film. But remember how I said that the real-world Batman tagline on Batman Begins was Nolan's second greatest trick? Well, here's number one. This chaos is an illusion. A truly random movie, an actual Joker-worthy bedlam, would suck, and the Nolans knew this. So instead of using that crazy Joker as an excuse to be lazily random, they kept everything in The Dark Knight grounded in solid fundamentals. When I said that no piece of fiction is realistic, I meant no good piece of fiction. In the iconic hospital destruction sequence, what we see as the audience is the Joker committing terrorism, but of course what's actually happening is the producers and special effects team executing a meticulously engineered controlled demolition. This is the most well-crafted screenplay Nolan has directed, as delivering the mirage of chaos while still being narratively satisfying ironically requires a much tighter grip, and I am in awe at how perfectly they threaded the needle and got the best of both worlds. Alright, we have dealt with the Joker and therefore the central theme of the movie itself. Surely we're gonna wrap this up, right? Not so fast, cause we still have to deal with Harvey Dent. Now, you may be thinking, am I really going to ruin the pacing of my own video just to take a cheap jab at the film's own clunky double climax? No, the pacing of my video was already shot. I couldn't put this section anywhere else, so if anything, the flaw of the movie just lets it feel appropriate. Thanks, Chris. Now, Harvey Dent is a good and integral part of the film. He's a charming character in his own right and drives one of the film's biggest questions. Is Batman needed when more legitimate do-gooders exist? This thread, which remains important moving forward, reflects an awareness that in this more realistic movie, it's worth asking if vigilantism can actually solve these problems, and it's tied very neatly into the plot, as the system that legitimizes Harvey and all of his good efforts rest upon as district attorney is exactly what the Joker is trying to tear down. However, after Rachel is killed by the Joker... there's the women writing Nolan I know and have notes for. And as a result, Harvey becomes Two-Face. That's when the character pops out of the groundedness. At first I wondered if it was just the design of his Two-Face. It's technologically impressive and is certainly going for realistic, but it is just too intense to be believable. It runs deeper than that, though. The real problem is that, simply put, this is not how people be. A man who's inspired an entire city and is shown as being genuinely virtuous is not going to become a gimmicky coin-based serial murderer overnight. Now, I personally have not had a fiance die in a fiery explosion. Mine drowned, so I don't know, maybe people can snap in ways comparable to this, but regardless, this fridging trope and the extreme aftermath is just way too movie for this movie. When it's surrounded by all the other stuff I've been talking about, it comes across as incredibly soapy. But you know what? Whatever. With just that one singed hair out of place, The Dark Knight is amazing. It is one of the greatest sequels of all time, and I want to quickly point out that its sequelness is paramount to its quality. The reason that this dense crime epic, as I put it earlier, resonated with general audiences on a scale that others haven't is because no other film of this type has had a Batman Begins. The Dark Knight doesn't have to build itself from the ground up in this trickier, less mainstream-friendly environment. All of the legwork was already done, and it was done in an incredibly approachable superhero blockbuster way. Also, yeah, The Dark Knight is way more action-packed and is way cooler than most crime movies, and that certainly doesn't hurt.
Goodbye.
It is so inspiring to see a creative vision sing like this. The Dark Knight really is that ideal realization of Nolan and company's goal to harmonize the character and comicness of Batman with the director's trademark grounded sensibilities. And it's really a shame we only got that perfect marriage once. Like, oh my god, that relationship is so out of whack in the third movie, and boy am I glad I don't have a show about franchise storytelling, or I'd have to expand on that. Oh.
It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is our plan.
The Dark Knight Rises is a perfectly watchable and undeniably well-produced piece of entertainment. It is also a complete conceptual disaster, one that crashes and burns in every way its predecessor soars, the Hindenburg to the Dark Knight's Apollo. So far, I haven't talked a lot about the impact that filmmaking has on our topic of comics versus realism, but that's only because I find that relationship self-evident, not because it doesn't exist. A film's aesthetics obviously set the tone and tell the audience what they should expect, whether they're consciously aware of that or not. That being said, while it does have its own unique aesthetic, The Dark Knight Rises looks and feels a lot like The Dark Knight. And while this does seem like a no-brainer for both Warner Brothers and Nolan, it is crucial that I emphasize how much it's going for the same tonal groundedness, because unlike The Dark Knight, the story beneath that does not match. The dissonance starts slowly. In fact, it takes a while to start at all, which is actually a big part of the problem. The film's opening is a terrific set piece that instantly establishes Bane as a force to be reckoned with. Bale's Batman had yet to face a purely physical threat, so I think it's a great idea to give him one right as his own abilities are beginning to wane, with age. And while the whitewashing of the character is an entirely valid criticism, I do like what Tom Hardy brings to the role. He's a very interesting mix of intimidating,
I'm in charge.
Do you feel in charge?
and weird.
Thank you.
Similarly, Anne Hathaway debuts early on as a very natural Selina Kyle and brings a great con artist energy to Catwoman. She's another exciting addition to the series here to kick us off. The whole first act, almost first half of Rises, is strong. It begins like a not as good, but still worthy Dark Knight sequel. You've got the groundedness, even Bane's big stock exchange holdup is part of a corporate power grab, and you've got the somberness in seeing how Bruce has surrendered to his own guilt and regret following the events of the Dark Knight, namely Rachel's death. But cracks soon begin to show. Batman's new vehicle, the Bat, doesn't quite obey physics, and we can tell. Bruce is told he has no cartilage left in his knees, then a wire brace thing lets him kick through brick. Speaking of brick, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's newcomer Officer Blake reveals that he figured out Batman's identity as a kid at an orphanage because he instantly sensed a shared hidden anger in Bruce, and while that's a nice sentiment and sets Blake up as Bruce's replacement come the close of the film, it is a very movie kind of beat, not a real-life one. It is also very convenient in order to move the story along, and that's another trend in Rises. Now, this is not a show dedicated to pointing out plot holes. That insipid detriment to film discourse of a niche has already been filled, but Rises does have a healthy handful of plot holes, and I'm not going to list them, but most are like that. Leaps in logic that allow smoother plot progression, or plot points that just don't really add up. Now, these happen all the time in movies, and that's fine, but if you're going for the tone of The Dark Knight, they cannot be this egregious, because they are, by definition, unrealistic. It's also a big problem to go from The Dark Knight, a movie that demanded the audience pay attention in order to keep up with the constantly shifting plot, to a film whose plot falls apart if the viewer gives it a second thought. A great example of this is how Rises fails to pay off Bruce and Gordon's decision from the end of The Dark Knight to keep Harvey's legacy, and thus Gotham's hope, intact by pinning his Two-Face murders on Batman, forcing him into hiding. Rises opens with Gordon speaking at Harvey's funeral, clearly indicating that their decision will have massive implications in this final installment. And sure enough, Bane happens to find a speech in Gordon's pocket revealing the truth when he happens to capture him early in the film. Then he reads the speech in front of Gotham's main prison in order to convince the people to free those Harvey put away and let them join his army. Oh no. Except, this doesn't make sense. First off, how does anyone know Bane is telling the truth? He could be making all of this up. The only real benefit of the letter being real is that Bane doesn't have to write one himself, so he can save some money on stationery. But much more importantly, at this point in the film, Bane has assassinated the mayor, trapped the entirety of the police force underground, cut Gotham off entirely from the rest of the world, and has enacted martial law with the help of a nuclear bomb. Oh yeah, those grounded stakes from Act 1 go 0 to 60 faster than you can say what weighs 6 ounces, sits in a tree, and is very dangerous, and that speed in of itself really exacerbates the problem. My point is that the answer is a sparrow with a machine gun, by the way. Bane does not need to convince anyone to let him do anything. He's already in charge. This makes no difference whatsoever, so the entire Harvey subplot is completely squandered. Contrivances and conveniences can add up, and they do, but if we're going to get to the heart of Rise's disconnect, then we're going to have to talk about one of the 3 things that Linus Van Pelt says we never should. The Great Pumpkin. Religion? Politics.
You're all going to wonder how you ever thought you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us.
The Dark Knight Rises came out a year after the Occupy Wall Street movement took hold, and for reasons harder to understand than Memento, the Nolans decided that they should comment on it. As such, one of Rise's most prominent themes is class, specifically the anti-1% rhetoric that Occupy Wall Street was known for.
I've paid you a small fortune.
This gives you power over me?
Now, this trilogy has awkwardly tiptoed up to these subjects before to confusing results. Batman Begins has Bruce acknowledge that crime is often committed out of necessity.
First time I stole so that I wouldn't starve, I lost many assumptions about the simple nature of right and wrong.
But the film is very careful to lay the blame for Gotham's crime problem on mob boss Falcone, even though all logic would dictate that he's merely capitalizing on the desperation of people who have fallen victim to massive economic disparity. But then Ra's al Ghul drops this contradictory, absolutely buck-wild bombshell.
Over the ages, our weapons have grown more sophisticated. With Gotham, we tried a new one, economics. But we underestimated certain of Gotham's citizens, such as your parents.
Sorry, what?
Yes, we deemed capitalism to be the ultimate tool of societal destruction, but it turned out to be rad and flawless, actually. Curses, foiled again by the good billionaires!
Now, pointing out that Batman is a multi-billionaire who beats up poor people all day rather than use his obscene wealth to help decrease poverty and thus prevent much of this crime is not what I would call the hottest take. But Rises doesn't even go down that obvious route. No, instead it makes Bane a self-proclaimed voice of the people who rattles off all the Occupy slogans they could throw at him.
We take Gotham from the corrupt, the rich, the oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity, and we give it back to you, the people.
We can interpret this one of two ways. The less likely explanation is that this is an intentionally malicious jab at people who agree with what the Occupy movement was saying. The Nolans wanted to show those commies who dare question the ultra-wealthy, so they made their villain Bane a walking straw man argument. And I thought Batman already defeated the Scarecrow. I find the second explanation of just thoughtlessness much more convincing, and not just because I'd hate to think that my favorite filmmaker has that garbage of politics, but because this kind of political shorthand where you give your villain sympathetic, even honorable motives so you can pretend to be thoughtful, only to also make them an unequivocal monster so they can be justifiably destroyed without actually addressing those initial motivations, happens all the time in blockbusters. This has always bothered me, but I've got to say that especially after dealing with the more openly political Hunger Games and especially classic Planet of the Apes films as I worked on their videos, this fierce reluctance to do anything but reaffirm the legitimacy of the establishment really reeks of cowardice.
It's a stock exchange. There's no money you can steal.
Really? And why are you people here?
No matter the intention, this class warfare through line of Rises is absolutely incoherent, and not just because it doesn't go anywhere, but because these very real-world issues are utterly incompatible with the big blockbuster approach that they take with the story. If you want to actually talk about the massive wealth gap in this country, or try to meaningfully refute this anti-capitalist line of thinking, you cannot have the people assault and prosecute any and all rich people in order to give control of the city to a militaristic warlord. If you want to thoughtfully question the motives of people who stand against the current system of incarceration, you cannot have the people arm violent offenders with AK-47s. Absolutely none of this, I dare not use the word commentary, is even remotely on the mark. Nobody who believes these things would do the things the film has them do. It's talking about nothing, none of it means anything, so why do this? Well, because we gotta have our epic trilogy capping movie. Someone's gotta be his army, Bane's gotta get control of Gotham somehow, so any and all plausible philosophies within the film become caricatured to the point of balderdash. This is the kind of amateur theming that I'd expect from Nolan's first attempt at a blockbuster. Some hotshot indie director comes in with big ideas of commenting on the real world and then haphazardly bashes away at those concepts with storytelling tools he hasn't the slightest clue how to use yet. The fact that this happened after one good and one excellent blockbuster of the same series and two unrelated high-budget films, and has not even remotely happened in his 3 films since, is completely beyond my abilities to explain. What's more, Bane doesn't even believe this stuff. He just wants to blow Gotham up. Batman wouldn't actually be fighting these ideas even if they made any sense. Because Nolan foolishly felt compelled to follow that blockbuster rule where the third villain of a trilogy simply has to be linked to the first film's villain in the name of stupidly obvious full circleness.
I am the League of Shadows. I'm here to fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny.
Not only this, but it turns out that Bane is, gasp, Ra's al Ghul's son? Where the Joker and the story he brought with him perfectly matches Nolan's tone, Bane's story shatters it. It is hard to not take this all pretty literally, because the only reason the bad guys are doing what they're doing is because they are the League of Shadows, and this is where the political stuff becomes an absolute joke. No, movie. People who want to raise taxes on billionaires are not secretly an ancient cult of evil ninjas. I don't think you got 'em. And no, people who push for clean energy sources do not do so because they actually want to turn them into nuclear weapons. I didn't forget about Courtyard's Miranda Tate / Talia, who worked with Bruce on a nuclear reactor project in between films, then at the last minute turns out to be working with Bane the whole time and is the real child of Ra's al Ghul. I cannot believe that a sequel to The Dark Knight ends with a combination twist villain and secret parentage reveal. Like, oh my god, if the Two-Face stuff in The Dark Knight was soapy, this is a damn bubble bath. What the actual hell were they thinking? Anyway, if it isn't clear by now, I kinda like this movie. Hey, I said there are positives, so let's quickly go over those. First of all, I will never get sick of morally great characters dramatically turning heroic at the last possible moment, so I'm a fan of Selina's arc. Also, I should come clean about something. I have a medical condition that makes me physically incapable of disliking a film that has Anne Hathaway in it. There is no cure. Next, while the form Rise's ambition takes is ill-conceived, ambition is still worth something. This story of a city falling into anarchy and the subsequent scrambling of our heroes within that setting is unlike any other superhero film, and it feels right to see what Ra's al Ghul tried to do and the Joker nearly succeeded in doing finally come to pass in a lot of ways. The Dark Knight Rises is also the most emotional installment of the trilogy. That's one of the two ways in which it actually bests The Dark Knight. Rises certainly benefits from the natural weight of being a franchise finale, as most of these emotional beats happen during the film's honestly excellent ending, and this goes a long way in salvaging the overall experience. Like, man, when Gordon figures out who Batman is, that gets me every time.
Bruce Wayne.
And you know what? I'll say it. I even like that Blake's legal name is Robin. There's your hot take. I think that's clever. Come fight me, nerds. Above all, while Bruce's origins in Begins are solid and his lack of significant development makes sense for The Dark Knight, he has the most compelling arc of all three films in Rises. His attempt to don the cowl once again early on feels doomed from the start, and sure enough, it leads him to a brutally memorable mid-film defeat at the hands of Bane. The way that the prison he's then thrown into is designed to evoke the well where he first developed his fear of bats is absolute chef's kiss, and I like the simple metaphor of him only being able to climb out of the pit once he refuses the safety rope and feels fear once again, namely the fear of death that comes with the will to live. His return to Gotham as now both physically and spiritually the Batman once more is the character's most triumphant moment. And the film ends Bruce's overall story very well. Across the trilogy, the relationship between Bruce and the Batman persona has been depicted as much an emotional crutch as a noble calling. Even Batman Begins, the character's origin story, ends with Rachel saying in so many words that Batman has consumed the Bruce Wayne she knew and loved. Then The Dark Knight rolls around and Harvey represents an out, a hero not on the fringe of society but at its core that could lead the city in a way he never could. But of course that chance, and Rachel, Bruce's reason to want normalcy, goes up in flames with Harvey. When we jump ahead 8 years for Rises, we see that Bruce never found anything else in his exile. That when he couldn't be Batman, he became nothing. Alfred even leaves in an attempt to make him see this. So while many people call Bruce's fake death a cop-out, I personally really appreciate that they didn't go with the standard heroic sacrifice for his ending, because this is more specific. Not only is it fun to get one last Batman is always 2 steps ahead moment, but it is far more meaningful that Bruce found a life outside of Batman, while still ensuring that the legend of the Dark Knight will continue. That said, this absolutely cursed insert shot, explicitly showing us that it's Bruce that Alfred sees in Florence, despite that being perfectly set up in a previous scene and exquisitely confirmed by Hans Zimmer's fantastic score, absolutely haunts me, and I swear to God, if I ever find the studio hack who forced them to put that in, I will probably just beg them to greenlight one of my scripts. I don't have that much pride. Like all the film's negatives, these positives also add up. I do consider Rises to be Nolan's weakest film, but I can't pretend like my feelings towards it don't fall on the positive side of neutral, if not by that much. These good things are what frustrate me the most, though. There are ideas here that would work great in Nolan's grounded world if you removed those that didn't, and there's blockbustery stuff that doesn't fit that wouldn't be a problem if Nolan tried a different approach, but with all of it together, it's a mess, and that's really disappointing. I really want to be a fan of this movie, not just because I'm a fan of Nolan and the previous two films, but because of its own qualities that are just tragically buried under deep flaws. I guess if nothing else, The Dark Knight Rises taught me the lesson that Bane wanted to teach Bruce, that there can be no true despair without hope. It's interesting how no matter what lens you look at the Dark Knight trilogy through, there's always an odd man out. Batman Begins is an outlier because it's the only one to play it safe and feel traditional. The Dark Knight is an outlier because it's the only genuinely grounded anti-blockbuster one. And The Dark Knight Rises is an outlier because it's not good. Despite this, the battle to pull off real-world Batman is waged all over these three films, and as I imagine this video has made quite apparent, I find that itself a fascinating study. I can't think of another series in which you can see the same filmmakers build up to, perfectly execute, and utterly whiff on their vision of a franchise. I hate to sound condescending, but it's very educational in that respect. Taken all together, I do hold the Dark Knight trilogy in high regard, although obviously the middle child is more than pulling its weight. And while it's great how Nolan is able to get his high-budget, high-concept standalone films financed, I would be happy to be wrong and see him return to franchise storytelling sometime in the future, because League of Shadows 2, Here We Go Again aside, he is good at this as well. And finally, in honor of the Batman's release, I have actually hidden a riddle of my own in this video, and that riddle is what my background prop was even supposed to be. I was going for a joke about the Batman voice that Bale does, and like he gets a sore throat, but it doesn't track at all, and I apologize.